Hello, I'm Joshua Gordon. This is the SCI TV. Uh, Welcome today to Emily Pualwan from hazingprevention.org. Welcome.
Thank you.
I think your name of your organization does a pretty good job of giving our viewers a hint of what we're going to talk about today, given our intersection of sports conflict and your work on hazing and hazing prevention. What I'd really like to do is get into some of that background, but first start with how you got to be in your role.
Sure, thanks. I have a public health background, so I've been with hazingprevention.org a little under a year, and I'm in the Associate Executive Director role now, started with more of the marketing and communications side. But my background has been in public policy, health initiatives. I've done smoking cessation and women health issues, cancer-related issues for a number of years. So moved into this arena to really focus on the advocacy and public policy and awareness issues around hazing and the prevention of hazing.
So it sounds like you've spent a good portion of your career really looking at some of these more large-scale epidemics and how we might change behavior, and this one certainly meets that criteria from my perspective.
Yes, that's correct.
So when it comes to hazing, could you start us off with a little definition of what is hazing and how do we recognize, let's lay some groundwork for our audience to understand, and then we can get into some of the more nuanced gray areas and interesting parts of it as well.
Sure, and as I'm sure your viewers are aware, there is a lot of gray area around what is hazing, what isn't hazing. We actually have a official description of hazing. I'll actually read it to you off of my paper because I want to make sure I get it right. Hazing is any action taken or any situation created intentionally that causes embarrassment, harassment, or ridicule and risks emotional and or physical harm to members of a group or team, whether new or not, regardless of the person's willingness to participate. And that last point I think is very important because a lot of times we'll hear, well, this group chose to do this, or these new members accepted the task that they were given. But the official definition is whether somebody chose to engage or not.
Yeah, one part that's very interesting to me in that definition as well is it doesn't matter if it was, well, you're saying intentional, correct?
Yes.
And can you speak more to that part of it, because I think that's interesting as well. I think that was early on in the definition.
Yeah. So any action taken or situation created intentionally that causes embarrassment. I mean, sometimes there will be situations where an unintentional outcome is that somebody was embarrassed, but that's a little different than hazing. Hazing is more planned. Hazing is more, joining a group and initiation and pledging and all of those activities that are fairly organized. Now sometimes the activities themselves can get out of hand and unintended consequences happen. I don't think any group plans on a death as an outcome, but they do plan to embarrass or ridicule or humiliate or put somebody through physical issues in order to belong or join a group, and that would be the definition of hazing.
And Emily, people often throw hazing and bullying into the same sentence and don't do much to distinguish, but I know that you all have done a fair amount of work to make what I think is a really helpful clarification between the two. Can you share that in terms of what is the difference between bullying and hazing, both of which obviously we don't want to happen in the sports world, but how are they different and why are they different?
Right. So as you said, both are obviously negative behaviors that we want to avoid. The biggest and the easiest way to see the difference is that bullying tends to be an exclusionary activity. So you're bullying somebody and you're excluding them from whatever your group or your beliefs. Hazing is almost just the opposite. It's an inclusionary activity where in order to join or belong or be a member or be valued, you're having to go through these initiation things. So it's an exclusion versus inclusion.
And so what's driving some of the increased focus these days on hazing? Is it that we're seeing more behavior that would be characterized as hazing? Is it that maybe our tolerance levels have shifted, especially in the sports world? or what else is going on there? And you have a lot of statistics at your disposal that might help enlighten some of this as well.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And I will try not to sound cynical in my initial response, but I do believe that a lot of the reason why a lot of this is coming to light is because of litigation and because of colleges and schools' fear of being sued. And obviously no college or university wants to have a death or somebody be injured. But more and more these are coming to light, and more they're finding themselves, these groups, these universities, even high schools, liable for the activities that are taking place under their watch. The other thing is that a number of years ago, maybe about 10 years ago or so, there were two major studies that came out that really quantified the extent of the problem. So before this, people didn't really know, they knew that there were these activities that took place. Sometimes they were called tradition, or, we've always done it this way. But until these studies came out, and one was from Alfred University, a gentleman named Norm Pollard, sort of drove this study that dove down into, at the college level, student athletes and student members of organizations to try to say what is the prevalence of this, and that's where some of the statistics that we have really shone a pretty bright light on the problem. And then organizations such as ours were able to be formed after that, where they had the statistics and they said, okay, this is the prevalence, this is the problem, now what are we going to do to prevent it? How can we take it to the next level and educate people and empower them to prevent hazing? So that was how our organization started. I can share with you some of those statistics if you like. For example, one of the things that we found is that hazing really starts at the high school level, and that more than people realized, hazing was taking place at a pretty significant level on high schools. So 47% of students reported that they were hazed before they even entered college. 1.5 million high school students across the country. That would basically translate to about 1.5 million, and that their hazing incidences started as early as the age of 13. Another statistic from a sports standpoint is 79% of NCAA athletes reported that they were initially hazed in high school. So they came to college with this experience. They came to college with some of these behaviors. Obviously, no high school administrator would tell you that it's acceptable, but the fact is that there's a prevalence at the high school level that bleeds over into the college experience, and in some cases is intensified.
So you're talking about a number of college athletes who have kind of grown up on hazing as part of their sporting culture, at least a percentage of them. And so I guess one question I have for you is, how many people are having their careers cut short? Do we know this because of hazing? Obviously one response to hazing, other than surviving it, is to walk away. And so how many of the folks are getting weeded out during those high school years and maybe even during college years from athletics, which we know serves an important function in development for a number of people, just because hazing is poorly managed?
And I don't believe that we have access to some of those detailed statistics. What we do know is that the vast majority of hazing incidences are not reported, but that the emotional toll it takes on students can result in poor grades, in dropping out of the sport or activity or group that they've joined. There are a number of suicides that were sort of indirectly linked back to bullying and hazing incidences. So deaths and suicides and dropping out of school, etc., are probably more prevalent than we know because of some of these activities that students had to endure.
Yeah, very, very interesting. When you look at even a study recently by ESPN, they were talking about why people drop out of sports, and they were looking at the ages of around 13 to 15 years old. And one of the things they highlighted were some of the statements as to why people had left. And three of the top categories came down to problems with the relationship with their coach, problems with the relationship with others, and generally not feeling respected or treated well, right? And those maybe aren't all the direct result of hazing, but certainly they're has to be some interrelationship between that type of culture that's developed and some of the behavior that comes out of hazing as well.
Yes, and 3 out of 5 students, athletes, reported hazing as part of their sort of sport experience. So it's pretty prevalent, and I would say that's actually probably higher, because when we've done some of the research, we found that students don't even necessarily self-identify some of the activities as hazing. You know, as an adult, we could say, that's wrong, that's hazing, and the student might say, oh, well, that's just part of being a part of our team. So if 3 out of 5 reported it, it could be even higher than that.
So pretty shocking numbers in terms of prevalence. So I think you've got my attention, and I hope you have my audience's attention about how problematic this is. Now, can we dig into a bit of why this continues to perpetuate? What are some of the ingredients that go into hazing being a repetitive part of team culture and sports, particularly at the college level, but obviously if we have to look back at the high school level to see where it came from, that may be meaningful as well?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure we know all of the reasons. Part of it is human nature. Part of it is, if you think about all these students that came up through this experience in high school, they carry that with them. If I had to go through it, you're going to have to go through it. You know, I suffered this as a freshman and survived, and therefore I'm going to put the, you know, the incoming class or the student group through it themselves. So I think there's probably a variety of reasons why. I also think that the coaching staff and the professionals, at least at the university level, are not always aware of a lot of the activities that take place. So they're aware of the sanctioned activity or some of the sanctioned activities, but we found in our research that a lot of things that take place with the students are aware of it, the other teammates are aware of it, but the coaches and the staff are saying that they're not aware that those activities are taking place. So some of it's secret, some of it's what people call tradition, just sort of long-standing activities that haven't been brought to light enough to sort of clamp down on it. And I do think that we're seeing colleges taking more of a stand, educating their students. Cornell University is a perfect example. They have a great website. If you go to their website, they have a wonderful hazing prevention website. They take place in, they participate in our National Hazing Prevention Week that we have every September. They've got staff and faculty who are dedicated, involved, student groups who are involved, and hazing still takes place on a college campus. It still does. So I think it's, you mentioned, you know, some of the work that I did, for example, in smoking cessation, where it took us 20 years to denormalize smoking in your office, right? It was a long, slow, steady process from multiple prongs to say, you know, we're going to shine a light on this, we're going to show people why it's dangerous, we're going to show people a better path, and we're going to, you know, sort of lead the public in joining with us to change behavior. And I think that same is the case with hazing.
Yeah, I'd love to get into some of the gray area as well. One of the things that strikes me, you know, I teach a bit at the university as well, and I'll talk to my students about sport ethic and the idea that we have this expectation of athletes that they are tougher than the rest of us in many ways. And this starts at an early age and continues on through college and professional years. And so, you know, what might be completely unacceptable when I'm in my professor role, if I had my coach hat on, would seem to be very acceptable. So I might ask a student to come in with a flu to take an exam, and I would probably be in trouble as a professor in that moment. But as a coach, to ask your athlete to play sick or to play hurt or to generally push down feelings if a grandmother died or other these things seems like a norm. And I start to wonder if that sport ethic itself has a relationship to hazing and some of those behaviors, because it signals that there is a certain toughness that we expect of athletes.
I suppose, although I would argue that hazing also occurs in bands and in, you know, Greek organizations and, you know, in a variety of cheerleading and honor societies even. So I do agree that there is probably some relationship between sort of the sports and the man up and, you know, the whole concept of that toughness, but it isn't only obviously an issue in sports, and it tends to be more, if you think about it, an issue of joining a group or becoming a member of an organization or a group that you're not yet a member of.
And Emily, are there big differences in terms of how hazing presents itself by gender? Do men haze differently than women, or does it have some of the key components no matter which gender is participating in the behavior?
I believe that there's probably a difference in the types of activities, but what we found in the research was that both male and females reported a high level of hazing. So that incident that I told you about from high school was significantly high both in male and females, and that continued on in college. Yes, we do see that more of the deaths seem to occur in males. Not sure exactly why, or it could be just some of the groups or activities, but it is prevalent in both sexes. Yes.
Great. And one of the things that we've been talking about with recent administrators, including folks like Bob Scalise from Harvard, was the idea of isolation of student athletes on campuses. And so the Ivy League takes a pretty strong stance that student athletes have to live and eat and do everything with the rest of the student population. That's actually the exception in college sports. More the norm is that a team will live together, eat together, often study together, and travel together, and have a very cohesive existence, but also an existence that keeps them isolated from others. And one of the curiosities that we came up with was around the topic of hazing and which would be the preferred structure for student athletes if we're trying to support prevention of these types of negative behaviors.
I'm not sure I could answer that scientifically, but I would say that because we find that a lot of hazing activities take place in secret, that my thought would be that the more that the group is separated from or isolated from the more general student population, the more that there might be an opportunity for sort of off-campus or more secret or more quiet activities to take place that aren't that the rest of the population isn't as aware of. Because back to our point that we talked about, hazing is now a topic that most students are aware of. We just got awarded a bid to provide an online course to all incoming Florida public college students, similar to the DUI courses that students have to take. Why? Because the campuses and the states are realizing that students need to be aware of this issue so that they can take it as their own responsibility and stop it. So if the students or the athletes are isolated, it might make that more difficult than if they were more insinuated throughout the college experience, where other students might say, "Hey, that's wrong. We don't think we should do that." So it's just a thought.
Yeah. So it sounds like some of what you're saying is that there are behaviors that to outsiders would jump out as being odd and crazy, and why would you do that? Why would you agree to that? But if you become enmeshed in part of a team culture, that over time that does start to feel fairly normal. And if you've grown up in that culture, and from what you're saying, if you grew up in that culture from high school or before, and then at college level, that's just part of what it means to be part of a team, right? That you're going to have to show that you can be part of that culture and go through the rituals that they expect.
Yes, exactly. For example, I'll give you another statistic. Let's see if I get this right. So, and the disconnect between what the students do and what the coaches or the athletic directors might be aware of. So in our research, 42% of college athletes reported that they were given or drank alcohol during recruitment visits. That's 42%. Clearly, most college recruits are under the age of 21, so that would be considered an illegal activity just because of the fact of the age. And when coaches were asked, less than 10% said that they were aware of any alcohol that was involved. So, is there a direct connection between alcohol and hazing? Alcohol and dumb behavior, yes. So there's an example of where students were clearly involved in something that the leadership was not necessarily aware of, is not necessarily aware of.
And Emily, one of the things I often hear if we bring up the subject of hazing with student athletes or coaches is that those of us trying to prevent these things, we're perceived as trying to get in the way of fun and get in the
Exactly.
way of things that are important. How can you help distinguish between, we're not trying to take away the fun in being on a team or camaraderie or any of that, but where can we help people understand that line between what is positive, supportive teammate behavior and what is, in fact, negative and destructive?
Yes, and it is a fine line, and we get that sometimes where you're trying to be too politically correct, and everything we're trying to do is considered wrong, and that's not the case. I mean, there's a spectrum from clearly acceptable activities to clearly unacceptable activities, but there's a whole range in between. So, for example, what are some acceptable activities that a team can require of their new recruits? That they maintain a certain GPA, for example, that they take an oath of conduct, that they dress for school activities or extracurricular activities, that they wear a suit, that they test for a particular skill, right? They'll put them through Combine and all of these different activities to say, okay, can you test for the skill? So all those are clearly acceptable, if you want to call them initiation, but acceptable behaviors for somebody joining a sports team. And then you go all the way to the other end where clearly unacceptable would be, drinking yourself into a coma or eating, horrible foods or spicy foods or forced activities, paddling, beating. We see some of these reports where kids are taken out into the woods and their shoes are removed and no water and no phone and have to find their way back. I mean, very harsh conditions that are clearly, dangerous and can result in death. And then in between are all of those different gray areas, getting your head shaved or having to get a tattoo, deprived of food, deprived of sleep, those. The difficulty there is that it's a slippery slope and it can very quickly escalate, especially if these activities are taking place outside of the guidance of professionals or administrators, that they can quickly escalate into dangerous activities.
And what about things like language and nicknames and those types of behaviors? Because I think a lot of what we'll see may start from that, where you have nicknames, they may sound like they're good, clean fun, but the way they're received or experienced aren't that way at all.
Exactly. So we have, and it isn't always cut and dried. And when you use an example in isolation, I was called X. Okay, but what came before that? What came after that? What were the consequences of not being called X, right? We saw in professional sports when Des Bryant said, no, I'm not going to do this. It was like, well, it's just carrying a backpack. What's the big deal? But the fact of the matter is that when it came to light, it was more than just carrying a backpack. It was things that took place before and afters. So some of the questions that we ask, then this is more for the high school or college level, but if you're in a situation and you wonder, is this hazing? Is this a hazing activity? Some of the ways you can ask yourself is, would you be comfortable if a parent was watching this activity? Would you be comfortable or would you get in trouble if a student administrator came by and saw what you did or listened to your nicknames or heard those? Sometimes the example we say is, would you want this? Would you want this as part of an interview on air, right? With the words or the names or the activities that you did. Would you want that on YouTube? Are you being asked to keep it a secret? Why? Why should it be a secret? It should be something that your team and is in your code of ethics and is sort of published and sanctioned. Obviously, is this illegal? So if you're drinking or being forced to drink, or is there a consequence to your not taking place in this activity? So that if you say, I'm not going to have that drink, then you're not a part of the team or you're not on the starting bench or whatever, then clearly that's some ways that you can, some warning signs that the activity may be considered hazing.
Great. And we talk about in sports there being four major stakeholder groups, administrators, coaches, athletes, and supporters. I was wondering if I could get you to touch on each of those groups and how they could help structure a team and culture that is going to help prevent hazing from their perspective. So obviously, an athletic director has different input than a coach, and an athlete has a different perspective than a family member or another supporter.
Right. So I would say from an athletic director standpoint that their biggest responsibility is understanding and sharing what the laws and rules and requirements of the university are, and educating all of those stakeholder groups on what those are. So this is a school policy. This is not my decision. This is the school decision, and that this team could get banned, that this group could be, excommunicated, etc. So that's really from an administrator. And then the other thing would be holding themselves accountable and taking swift action. So if you're going to punish a band for doing something, you need to punish your star quarterback for doing the same thing. You have to be consistent. It's what parents say, right? You have to be consistent in the rules and in the enforcement of the rules. Coaches, of course, and coordinators are more on the front line. So they are the mentors and talking to the team on a daily basis and reinforcing the positive activities and not the negative activities. And the more that the coach can have the ear of the athletes and vice versa, the more they won't be so isolated and not know what's going on. So that some of those statistics would be more in line. And then students and athletes themselves, taking a personal responsibility to say, I'm a member of this team. I'm proud to be a member of this team. I value and respect myself and my teammates, and that I'm going to emulate those. The oath that I'm sure you took, is one that I believe in and I'm going to stand up to. And it's difficult if you're a student and you see everybody else doing it and you want to join and you don't want to get kicked out. That's probably the most difficult of the four groups, is to be able to feel empowered to do the right thing. And then from a supporter standpoint, sometimes a lot of what we see with supporters is that those are the ones that are steeped in the tradition, right? That those are the parents and the last generation and the ones who went through this toughness, and that think that everything's too soft now. And so it's also educating the supporters that that this is a very strong statement, and that this makes your team or your organization stronger as opposed to weaker by not putting up with some of these more sort of back alley type activities as your team progresses.
Great, and a lot of the work that we do with teams, we talk about things like having team charters and goals and mission statements, and we look at athlete development plans. What are some of the structures that you highlight as being really essential for that formula for a team to have in order to really make sure they're creating the type of culture that is positive and isn't supporting hazing? And obviously the goal for any team is to be successful, right? And we're talking on-field and off-field performance, and I think few people would walk in and define hazing as a successful endeavor. So how can you help them create structures that are going to create checks and balances and performance indicators that are going to keep them out of the realm of hazing being the headline for them?
Right, and I agree with you. Very few, if any, would say hazing is a good thing. The difficulty is what they define as hazing and what isn't. Pretty much every team in school has that oath and that conduct, requirement. It's sticking to it. It's believing in it. It's reinforcing it from the top down. It's emulating it. So, unfortunately, in some cases, we see that the coaches were involved and that the coaches did say, oh, well, I did it. I didn't realize it was hazing. So education, and then reinforcement and, reward for more of the positive achievements, I think, is, and bringing it to light, having less things secret, less things, hidden, more upfront with the activities that take place is probably some of the best first steps that they can take.
Great. And are there examples that you can share? Obviously, there's certain confidentiality when you've worked with a client that you can't expose, but other examples that are hit national headlines. Even in the last week, we know University of New Mexico women's soccer had a situation around drinking where part of their hazing routine was excessive drinking, and 2 folks ended up in the hospital, many others ended up very sick. The coach came out and profusely for it and took a suspension. But we see lots of these things over the years. We had Humboldt State shut down a season on their soccer. We had Cornell, who you mentioned as being a very good university. At one point, they had a lacrosse team that had a very big issue. We had Florida A&M had a death on their marching band, and you could probably go off a ticker list of many, many more. But are there examples you can talk about that help illustrate a lot of the theory we've been touching on, and both positive and negative responses to hazing?
Well, there have been, I believe it's at least one hazing death on a college campus per year for the last 20 years. And in some cases, like this year, I think we've already had 3. Not all sports related, but in a variety of different activities, both sports and band and Greek. So the prevalence is still there. Obviously, alcohol on college campuses is an issue that we don't directly involve ourselves with, but that can lead to, some of these negative activities. And a lot of students don't always live on college campuses. They're in more of the surrounding community. So colleges can't police everything a student or a group does. In the New Mexico's case, the coach took responsibility and acted swiftly, and I think that's important, to hold your students and yourselves accountable for the activities. But again, I think it's going to be more of an awareness and a denormalization of some of the things that have taken place, year after year, having every student on the campus feel a sense of community and believe that it's everybody's responsibility can come a long way. So that in the past, maybe these activities took place and everybody took a blind eye to it. Now I think more people are empowered to be able to report it, and colleges are making it easier for people to report incidences, whether they're sure if they're hazing or not.
And Emily, there seems to be a lot of mythology around hazing being critical to performance. Any research that you've come in contact with that debunks that, where it says, look, hazing is hazing, it's not part of a necessary ingredient for performance, so let's stop this as part of this false idea that that's how we win?
Yes, there has been quite a bit of research. I'm not sure if it's how much is directly sports related, but there has been research that says, that hazing does not reinforce tradition or bonding, that it does just the opposite, that it tears groups apart, that it causes psychological damage that's not always obvious, and it sort of has that tail effect of negative mistrust, etc. So I'd be very curious to see if there's been very direct correlation between sports performance and teams that are clearly non-hazing versus hazing. I've seen it in Greek organizations, ones that have in their creed and really believe in some standards and don't do paddling, etc. But I think the science supports the fact that these types of activities do not have a positive outcome.
And you all are in the business of trying to change this massive behavior, and you've done this in a number of settings, and now you're doing this in hazing. What have you found to be really effective? Is it education? Is it something else? And what are some of the resources that you all have that are available to people to engage with to really make an impact on this area?
So there's a number of groups, not just ours, who are involved in hazing prevention activities, and I think the more groups can get involved and the more that it becomes community activity, the better. So we're one of many players, and we're pleased about that. On our website, which is hazingprevention.org, we have a number of resources that are available. We sponsor National Hazing Prevention Week, which is in September this year. It's September 22nd through 26th, and it takes place in college campuses across the country, across college life. So groups and organizations, bands and athletics, etc., can sort of come together and sponsor National Hazing Prevention Week and get some of the awareness out to the student population. We also have webinars that are mostly for professionals in student life. We have a Novak Institute on Hazing Prevention, which is a very intense 4-day institute that takes place over the summer at a college campus. This year it's at University of Memphis. And next year it'll be at the University of Memphis as well. Again, for those who are involved in student life and want to learn more about how they can institute hazing prevention activities on their campus.
Fantastic. Those are some very rich resources. Any books or articles that we should point people to as well as part of that resource package?
On our website, there is a resources section which has websites and articles, statistics that people can access as well.
Great. And any final thoughts that you want to leave us with to take away from this talk on athletics and hazing and that intersection, and certainly, whether it's helping people distinguish between what we see in Major League Baseball, where you might have people take an airplane trip in women's clothing, versus some of the other things that we're seeing that have led to death and people leaving sports and all that. Any final thoughts that help tie this together for us as we wrap up?
Again, I would say, ask yourself those questions of, would I be comfortable if a parent or administrator saw this? Is it illegal? Is it against my code? Would my team lose its ability to play? Would my organization be suspended, etc.? Some of those questions are really good. The other thing is, you don't always know when you're in the midst of things, whether it's hazing or not. And we encourage people, if you see something happening and you see somebody who is being hurt, call 911. That's the first step in reporting. Whether you're on a college campus or off a college campus, call 911. If after the fact, or if it's less of a severe case, you want to report hazing, you can call 1-888-NOT-HAZE and report that through that toll-free number, which is, of course, nationwide. And then I would also say, visit our website at hazingprevention.org for additional resources. If you need to contact any of us, if you have questions about activities on your campus, etc., we'll be glad to help.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this important issue, and even more importantly, thank you for all the work that you and your organization are doing to prevent and not just allow this to continue to happen, and we're really appreciative of that. And if we can be helpful to you in your work at any point, please let us know, and please do come back again on the show as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.